Looks good. Yep. I'm going to call our meeting to order. Today is November 14th, 2017, and this is a business meeting of the North Kingstown School Committee. If I could have everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, if you could please call the roll.
Mr. Glasbach?
Here.
Mrs. Hoskins? Mr. Jones?
Here.
Mrs. McLaughlin? Here. Ms. Stevens? Here. Mrs. Shaw? And student representatives?
Here. Thank you. And if you could call the calendar.
On Monday, December 11th, there will be a joint budget meeting with the Town Council. And Tuesday, December 12th, there will be a school committee business meeting.
Thank you. The first item on our agenda is a presentation and recognition with a citation from the school committee for Brierly Malore. Mrs. King, if you could speak a little about that, because I know you work with him very closely.
We did. So we did have a moment of silence for Brierly when he passed away a few weeks ago. Brierly was a very dedicated member of our facilities subcommittee. He had been on the committee from the inception of the committee back to 2010 or before that. And he was very dedicated to the school department. Mrs. McGovern had an opportunity to work with him also the last couple of years. Anytime you needed anything from him, he was always there. Very great personality, very cheerful person. He really, his passing has left a hole in our building committee for sure. We were at a meeting last, and Mr. Grundy, who's the chair of our building committee, had also asked if we would do some sort of a letter or something, and we thought that a citation was a really nice thing to present. We will send that off to his family, thanking for the hours that he gave up for the school department, his dedication to the district. His son also does work in our district, in our transportation department. So Brierly his family has given a lot of time to the North Kingstown School Department.
And we thank him and we're very sorry for their loss. Next, Dr. Ajay.
Yeah, I have. Just wanted to, bring everybody up to date on, the tremendous season. I think it's probably the best season ever for our fall sports at the high school. We usually just go through sports, but it's really worth talking about this time. So, actually, middle school soccer and our field hockey team both have won state championships, and there are regular season champions for freshman football, JV volleyball, girls cross country, girls volleyball, boys soccer, and varsity football. And Coach Julie McGuire of field hockey was inducted into this class of the Hall of Fame. So you can't really get much better than that for a fall season. And things are still going on. There are playoff games happening all this week, so it's a good time to be a Skipper fan out there. Last week, real tremendous honor to be at the ceremony in Washington, D.C. for Fishing Cove and 300 other schools nationally who have received Blue Ribbon Awards. And just so that the community is aware, we're going to have our own NK ceremony. Because Fishing Cove doesn't have a gymnasium and the room to do it, we're going to have it at the North Kingstown High School auditorium, and that will be Monday, December 18th at 6:30. And Governor Raimondo and Commissioner Wagner will be on hand for that ceremony.
Thank you very much. Next, we have citizens' comments. If anyone has signed up to speak. If you haven't and want to, there's a sign-up sheet behind you. Or you can jump to the microphone. So since no one's jumping to the microphone, I assume no one wants to speak this evening, but thank you. So first item on our regular agenda is item 3A, which is the approval of our CIP. I'm actually going to ask for a motion to table this evening, and we're looking to schedule a special meeting to go over that and a couple of other issues within the next week or so, or next couple of weeks. So we can spend a little more time on it to get a little more detail. So if I could have a motion to table item 3A.
So moved.
Could I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor of tabling this item?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so we will take that up shortly. Next, we have school committee approval of stage 2 priorities in our asset protection plan. Mrs. King, will you speak briefly to that?
So, again, to update everybody, we're going through our 5-year asset protection plan with RIDE. It requires a stage 1 and stage 2 submittal. And tonight, we have Jim Partridge from our architect's office, Edward Rouse Architects, and Jim Grundy, who's the chair of our building committee. So stage 1 was submitted on October 16th, and stage 1 is primarily, a lot of information about the district and demographics and enrollment, and then the big part are the documents that you had attached to your October 24th meeting, I think it was, that Mr. Partridge prepared, which are all of the items at all of the schools that need work. And that total came up to about $63 million. So those were items like roofing and eye wash stations and emergency lighting and whatnot. So that's all buildings, including the D building across the district. The D building being where we have some support staff in that building. So stage 2 is due February 1st. Mr. Partridge and I met with RIDE last week, and what is required of the next stage is a little bit of refinement of the stage 1 piece. Mostly what's required is for Mr. Partridge and his team to plan out schematic design of what projects we are looking toward doing over the next 5 years, or hope to do over the next 5 years. That is really an incredible amount of work. So what we want to be able to do tonight is to give Mr. Partridge some direction on what of the $63 million he would be looking at. And clearly, we should be looking in priority order. I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer with anything else that you guys might want to include in that. But they are both here if you have any questions on anything. Mrs. McGovern was at the meeting that we had with the building committee as well. The building committee knows that this is a process we need to go through with RIDE. We talked about how complicated it really is. We really need to commit some of our own dollars, as well as if we think we're going to ask for any bonding money or what it is we're going to do. But we are required by RIDE to have this 5-year asset protection plan on file. And then that will further whether or not we can get housing aid through RIDE's approval process. The RIDE representatives from the construction office also are going to come and meet with the building committee. That we think is going to happen on December 13th. We already had a meeting scheduled with the building committee. They're going to come and tour some of the schools with Mr. Partridge during the day. So it's a rather lengthy process, but we did get approval that stage 1 was accepted, which is great news. And the major part of it now is we're really looking at those particular projects, and you guys have all of that information in your packets.
So I think at this point what we need to do is do a recommendation, which I think would be that we have them take a look at basically our priority 1 through 3 items, which would put us in a good position, and this goes into what we were just talking about as part of our CIP as far as what we're actually going to be able to address and come up with a plan for addressing these items. But that would give us, it's a balance between flexibility and the amount of time that's going to be involved in putting these things together.
So do any of you have any questions?
Questions for
on any of the projects or what any of the priorities mean? Because Mr. Partridge can explain that. Priority 1 or code compliance, that kind of thing. But he can explain to you how, we've come up with the priorities and what priority 5 means if we're not really planning those out, that kind of thing.
For anybody who, we are often asked, I've been at meetings where people say, well, do you have a list of, what needs to be fixed and what priority? And the answer is always yes. The problem people have with it is that it is, in some ways, an overwhelming list. It's, I don't know how many pages in our packets. Thankfully, we don't print them anymore. We'd all have a stack on the desk right now of about this high. So going through, you can see that the level of detail is quite detailed, and that's why everything does have a priority attached to it, whether it be priority 1, which is code conformance, which are obviously the most important items, going down to I don't want to call them nitpicky items, but I mean they're smaller items. So I mean I'm just randomly, looking at a page and it says, so, there are things like, replacing a quarter panel, or a little item like that might be a smaller, fix a drain or something like that, that are small items as opposed to some of the things that are more important. And it's all laid out in this plan. So by looking at, I think, priority 1 through 3, that's sort of a compromise that will give us a good place to move forward. Does anyone have any questions on any of the items in particular for our engineers? Then I'll make a motion that we have a review done, or at least that they focus on the priority 1 through 3 items with respect to the asset protection plan, and start working on that.
And the total of that comes to $47 million, by the way.
So the trick is to figure out what we can afford to fix, how we're going to pay what we can fix, and then prioritizing the items, even within that list.
I will second that.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I just want to point out, labor, but a lot of work that goes into doing this. So, Sheila, who's our representative, and obviously the superintendent, and Mrs. King, and everyone else who spearheads all the maintenance, building, and that stuff, and all our volunteers who are on our building subcommittee. Appreciate all the work because it's nice to see the list, and that's all great stuff, but there's a lot of work that goes behind that to put that together. So appreciate all the detail that goes into compiling this, and hopefully you're meeting with RIDE. They'll talk about streamlining the process.
Well, the issue is it's a very rigid process. So and the timing is, timing of things is never great, but the rigidity of the process is that we are unable to say, okay, let's say we have this 5-year plan, and we say we anticipate getting, I don't know, pick a number, $10 million worth of work done in year 1, but we're not really sure about some future plans. We'd like some more time to look into it. You have to go back, you have to start over. Now, clearly, next year I wouldn't have to start over with Mr. Partridge doing this, but you have to start over with the entire submittal of stage 1 and all the enrollment information and all the demographic information again. So I understand RIDE's point. They need to know, because I don't know how they possibly budget for housing aid if they don't have a time frame and an approval process. But it's just a little bit inflexible, and it's incredibly intensive. I mean, those sheets that you have are probably a tenth of what the size of the package was, because the rest of the stuff was enrollment information and demographic information, and
This is just stage 2.
that was just stage 1.
Well,
yeah.
that one, and this is 2, and and we move on
Yeah,
from here.
yeah.
So we have a motion and a second on the table. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Next, we have a report back. We had asked the administration to take a look at the heat issues in the high school on the 3rd floor, and we have some information coming back, so we could hear what we have for that.
So I do have some information, and then also Mr. Grundy, if we could, would also have some information that he can provide for us, some things that we need to keep our eye on going forward, and Mr. Partridge probably does too. So part of Mr. Partridge's stage 1 analysis did include an analysis of an air conditioning system on the 2nd and the 3rd floor of the high school. If we were to do anything with either the 3rd or the 2nd floor or both, we also need to do something with the atrium, because the doors on those floors are open, so that atrium that goes all the way up the middle is going to suck out a lot of the air. So you really need to, it's either the 3rd floor in the atrium or it's the 2nd, 3rd floor in the atrium. It's a whole project. You really need to consider doing the atrium. The system that, and I'm an accountant, so I know that Mr. Grundy and Mr. Partridge have a lot more information. The way I understand the system is you might know something about what they call the split units, and you might see a unit, like we had we had one of them at 100 Fairway, where you have one unit that can cool 2 rooms. Well, this is a similar type of system, but it can cool 5 or 6 rooms. And the great thing about that, if you choose this system, is that you have less equipment that you have to deal with. It's less equipment that goes out of, needs repair, and less equipment to purchase. So a couple of other things that I will say. There have been some, for years now that I've been here, the comment has always been that to fully air condition the high school, so that would be the rest of the first floor that's not air conditioned, because parts of the first floor are, and the second and third floor, the range has always been a $3 to $5 million range. I think by looking at these numbers, you can see that that's still the range, because we haven't looked at the rest of the first floor for air conditioning the rest of the first floor. The other thing that I would say is that the work that we have done to date, the $2 million that started practically 5 years ago when we were looking at the matrix and we were looking at recommissioning the high school, that work and that $2 million had to be done before we can even get to this point. So I know there's been a lot of question on has anything been done, nothing's been done, but although nobody really sees that work and it's not really sexy because it's not, in the field or whatever, that $2 million had to be spent. And we did spend that money. We spent a lot of time and effort on that. The building committee spent an enormous time and effort on that, and that really literally has been a 4-year project. So the first part of the item is the estimates for central air on the second floor is about $1.4 million. The same thing on the third floor. You have basically the same amount of classrooms. The atrium is just over $300,000, and then you would need to do the recommissioning of the system. So you're looking at an estimate of $3.2 million for the second and third floor air conditioning. The other items that we've looked at, some that the union has asked us to look at, and some that a couple of school committee members have asked us, the mounted fans. So we had a picture of a wall-mounted, ceiling-mounted, whatever, sort of in the corner. Those have to be properly wired. We can't just have an extension cord and plugged in to an available outlet. We spoke to the fire marshal, and clearly that has to be done. We're not going to be able to just stick a fan up on the wall and plug it in. So we're looking at $2,000 to $2,500 per classroom on that. You'd be looking at about 33 classrooms on each floor, so you'd be looking at about $165,000. Those are the estimates right now. The other thing that Mrs. McGovern asked us to look at would be the roofing, the coating on the rooftop over the classrooms, which is painting the rooftops white. Mr. Partridge was able to get us a pretty good estimate on that. So this $150,000 is for 48,000 square foot area, so it's just over the classrooms. That does have a 25-year warranty on the adhesion, just so that we know that information. Classroom shades we looked at, and we did get a professional estimate on those. They have an openness factor that they're 3% and 5%. They recommend 3% because that's closed up a whole lot better. We would be looking at about $60,000 for the second floor and the third floor. And then adding air conditioning units to the science classrooms would be about $30,000. And that is not really a recommended option. I need to let you know that RIDE CHIPS requirements, so that's the New England blah, 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 does not allow or does not approve for window unit air conditioning units. So with that being said, I know that we have some, but I'm just telling you that that is not a RIDE standard. So with that said, that's all I have. Those are the numbers that I presented to you. I think that was everything that everybody had asked for. And I would ask if we could hear now from Mr. Grundy and or Mr. Partridge about the air conditioning system at the high school.
Gentlemen?
Hi, everybody. So the system that Mary alluded to is basically what they call a variable refrigerant flow air conditioning system. It's a system that basically is comprised with what they call a direct expansion refrigerant heat pump condensing units that are located outside the building. Similar to what you see with an AC split system for your house or a smaller type commercial building. This particular system, though, also allows you to provide individual zones for each one of the classrooms versus conventional split system where you have one split system that's kind of serving two rooms like Mary had alluded to. But the other benefit of this thing is you can also provide supplemental heat. It's almost like what they call a heat pump system, so that they can actually provide and use some of the heat that's generated in some of the spaces and then reuse that for energy efficiency to be able to introduce supplemental heat if it was necessary. The benefits of this is that the refrigerant lines, which in the old days used to have some issues with respect to the runs of from condensing units to units, but this system is a little bit more advanced to the point where you can make runs that are longer, and it also makes it beneficial in terms of concealing refrigerant pipes above ceilings where you have tight areas relative to the incidental space that's above the ceilings, which you have on the second and third floors of the building currently. The units that actually provide the air conditioning and or heat are actually fan coil units, but they're on a smaller scale than what we normally see in older buildings. It does meet New England CHIPS requirements in terms of the noise levels, which is also a benefit. And then the real down point relative to this whole system is the initial cost of putting it in, but once it's in, it's supposed to be very cost efficient in terms of the energy that it uses, both electrical and refrigerants. And the operating expenses is also supposed to be very manageable relative to seeing a conventional mechanical system, that would be a ducted system or a hot water system or something of that nature. It's a system that's been developed probably just recently within the last 5 to 10 years, but has taken off to the point where a lot of conventional commercial applications, whether it's schools, municipalities, it also allows you to evenly distribute the air content that's coming from the system. Usually it's in the ceilings, it could be in the floors in some cases relative to the fan coil units, so that you can actually logistically locate items so that it's not blowing all at one person or a group of people, but it's evenly spread through rooms of sizes like this, like classroom sizes. So it's a really good system. I think it would fit the bill relative to what we're dealing with currently at the high school, and I think you get the best bang for your buck relative to what we're trying to achieve in terms of dealing with this heat issue that's occurring there right now.
Any questions from members? Thank you very much. Mr. Gundy.
Good evening. We just had a couple of notes from the facilities committee we put together. The first was to reiterate what Ms. King said, is that the problems at the high school have existed since the original construction, and that the work to date on the system has been exclusively to bring the system to the original contract design. Basically, the mechanical systems in the building were never completed. We had situations of dampers that wouldn't operate. We had 100% outside air coming in on 0-degree days. So the work done was all needed to give us a starting parameter and create what would be a basic functioning building. The existing components that are in place of little or no value as we design and go forward with a modern HVAC system. The system Mr. Podge talks about didn't exist at the time the building was built. And the only reusable component we have, or air conditioning ready component, would be the air handlers in the classrooms, which are approaching 20 years old. And that's about the life expectancy of an average air handler. The job that Jim Partridge and Rose has done from the facility subcommittee standpoint has been exceptional. The word Herculean was even used at the last meeting. The documents are just unending, and as with the last time we went through this RIDE process, we were the only South County community when we left the collaborative and went on our own that made the deadlines. think we're also leading the pack, making our deadlines. Again, these deadlines are, I'll be less gracious than Ms. King was, they're bordering on ridiculous. The amount of documents that are asked for are just, they're unending. We do agree that there's a substantial problem with the air quality and air temperatures in the high school, particularly on the 2 floors. And there were just a couple of things that while we support finding a way to make that better, we want you to be aware of as you go forward in your decision making. The first is the base construction cost, and the design and budget numbers provided by Rouse are in line with what we find to be industry standard per square foot cost estimates. This technology really is cutting edge, and we think it is the way to go. But we do want you to think about going forward that the cost of operating a system is going to include the electrical cost, the maintenance cost, and the servicing of the system. And that's something that's going to have to be planned for from a budgetary standpoint. There also is a potential and probable staffing increase. You're going to have to consider a refrigeration position, or at least outside vendors in service contracts, because these are moving parts. They do require maintenance. They do require service. We would recommend the development and implementation of an operations plan. And this could be something as simple as adopting a U.S. Department of Energy guideline, because as you have individually controlled rooms, you may want to have some sort of control over where the temperatures are. You're not going to want one room set at 65 and one room set at 78. It's also going to have to be addressed in the capital improvement plan that includes scheduled major repairs and implementation of an equipment life cycle, along with the budgeting for replacement of key components. These systems, like many others, have life expectancies, some as low as 10 years, up to 20 years. But once you put the system in, you will have to budget and plan for its replacement. And the last policy is probably the most difficult, and I'm glad that this is your decision and not ours. But it's going to be a policy or understanding of how you're going to deal with parity within the schools. We agree the high school, second and third floor seem to have the most complaints and probably the worst problem in the district. There are other areas in the school district that we do hear complaints of high temperatures and issues with it. And we think that it would be we'd be lacking if we didn't at least suggest that you consider how you're going to deal with the parity issue going forward.
Thank you. And, as we've done many times in the past, I want to thank you and the committee for all the hours that you volunteer and looking at these items and making these recommendations. It's very helpful and not unnoticed and unthanked. Thanks. Mr. Jones.
I'm Mary for Jim. So when we had the track folks in, they also talked about that a maintenance plan comes along with the installation of the track. So do the companies that install this have a similar, like come every so often and tweak it and do all that as potentially part of an installation package, or
Probably 1 year warranty is all you got.
well, 1 year warranty, but then or is it separate companies that then do the annual maintenance?
I would suspect that the district would end up doing like they do with their electrical and with their heating. They're probably going to have to develop and go out to bid, retain a company that will come in and perform the annual service. They do require an annual check. There's filter changes, there's certain components that have to be removed, and a lot of these use washable as opposed to straight disposable filters. Checking of pressures, you are going to find, just like with the air conditioning system at your house, you're going to have everything from field mice that nest in there in the winter to anything made by man can break. Life expectancies on these compressors are going to be very similar to your home air conditioning. If they last 10 years, you're not that happy, but at 15 to 20, you're expecting to do something more substantial. But there absolutely will be a maintenance component with it, and whether, depending on how many systems you put in, whether it's the district needing a full-time person or if it's something that's outsourced, that's probably going to be a product of how this is handled beyond the high school, and something that's going to have to be worked through. I don't know if, it's good to be on my committee and digress. We don't have to deal with it.
And we would have to come up with some estimates on the electricity usage and all that too, because that wouldn't be zero, for sure.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
I'd just like to jump in and say that I think I can speak on behalf of the student body and probably anyone who spends a day in the high school in September or June. Because the heat that is in the building most days towards the summer, it's not conducive towards learning. It's very hard for many people, including myself, and I think most people at the high school, to focus when temperatures in classrooms are above 80, 85 degrees. And there have been a number of instances where it's just too hot at times to learn. I can recall one instance in September, in fact, where one of my teachers' classrooms was so hot at 7 a.m. in the morning that we had to go to the library because it was just too hot for the teacher or for us to really do anything in class. So I think it's really an issue that I'm not sure what the best way to deal with it is, especially considering the high cost, but I think something does need to be done to resolve the issue.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? Thanks. Well, I mean, I can speak for myself, and I certainly agree with the teachers, the staff members who have to work in the building, and the students who have to deal with it. That it's something that we need to address, and it's a question of how to get it done. So it's not a decision that we can make this evening. It's part of, very much a part of, the discussion that we're talking about with respect to our capital improvement plan and how we're working on finding ways to fix the maintenance issues that we have throughout the district, as well as this new item that is, while not a maintenance issue, certainly an area of concern and something that we need to work with. As far as moving things along, we certainly don't have the funds at the moment anyway, until we work on some other things to do anything with respect to the air conditioning. Something in the right direction might be, Mrs. King, would you be able to take a look and get better pricing on the blind component?
The shades?
Yeah, the shades, and maybe put out an RFP or bid that out and see what that would come back at. Is that something you'd be able to do?
Yep.
Is that something that the committee is looking at doing further? I don't know if we even need a formal vote on that. I think we can.
No,
just
not
ask
until
you
I
to
do
it.
a bid.
Yep.
Yep.
So,
Excuse me,
yes.
one clarifying point?
Usually not, but I'll let you ask a quick question
Sure.
if you have a question.
Yes, clarifying, when you talk about classroom blinds, they're actually not classroom blinds, they're hallway blinds. Because I know you labeled it here, I was looking at your report saying 33 classrooms on the second floor, 33 on the third floor. Classrooms all have blinds. It's those big atrium of glass on each hallway that need solar shades to block the sun from magnifying the hallways.
And then going up. And then,
Right.
But that's not what we were asked to look
So-
into, so I can look into that further. I know that, I apologize, Dave, but that's not what was said to me. So otherwise, it wouldn't say classroom shades on it if that were the case.
Yeah, it's definitely the hallway stuff.
So the whole, that would have to make them an automated thing. What I do know about the greenhouse, I mean, you couldn't just have a pull-down shade in the hallway
because of
because
the
they won't last long. They'll get pulled down pretty quickly. I do know that we have looked at the greenhouse system because that system is not operating properly. And I'm pretty sure the greenhouse alone was $25,000. So what I will do then is I will at least get some idea of a range of idea. So I was under the impression that the shades in the classrooms, some of them were not, a lot of them were not operating, were not functioning. So Dave, you're telling me that's not true.
That's from what I know. No one's ever come to me about it. It's always been the hallway stuff.
Yeah. Do you mind coming? Well, we'll let you.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. To my knowledge, it's never been any of the classrooms. It's always been the hallway. And the kids could probably attest to this better since they float all over the building where I'm just stuck in the corner of the room. We also suggested last meeting that we were here at that either the shades in the hallway or tinting the windows. So that would be an option where once you tint them deeper, you wouldn't have to worry about anything mechanical breaking.
Yeah, there's an issue with tinting with RIDE standards in Gym Park. I know, I'm sorry to say that, but there is in Gym Park. You can speak to that a little bit more. It's a whole natural light thing. Jim, do you have any more comment on that?
I'm sure you might have been.
Drink your milk instead.
It's not just a lighting issue, it becomes a maintenance issue too. Because any film that you apply is usually at what they call a flood surface, which is an interior surface. And over time, kids will be,
Scratching it up.
with keys or whatever. And then it just kind of loses validity in terms of giving you an even screen over the glass. Usually the best result is to take a piece of glass and change it out where you have some kind of a frit that's applied by the glass manufacturer that's on the third
It's
surface.
built into the glass.
So that you can't touch it, you can see it, but it serves a purpose and it doesn't break down over time.
Now, would that be?
Is that a right issue, though? I mean,
They're looking for stuff that is going to last, 25 to 50 years, so.
but that's also replacing the entire window system, right? I mean,
Well, if you're replacing the glass that's in the window system, which gets very costly.
Right.
Films, they use it on other commercial type of applications, but it's not schools, where they're monitored a little bit more closely over time, Kids that are circulating back and forth, they have access to it, which, it's just going to be, I think, problematic sooner than you think.
so let's take another look at that, and then we'll see what we can do.
Look at the shades and/or tinting
Yeah,
and/or glass replacement. Okay.
Mr. Jones?
So just a timeline question. So, assuming $3 million is available, what's essentially the timeline from saying go to having it set up, and what would be any installation issues we'd have to work around?
Well, we'd be smart to purchase the materials ahead of time like we did for the rooftop units and stuff at the high school
I mean, if
because
you're going for films,
No, I'm talking about the
The AC
system.
the AC system, lead times relative to some of the equipment ain't as long as you would think. If you're dealing with like rooftop equipment, those usually are like 6 to 8 weeks. Where these are all small devices, you're probably looking at a lead time roughly around 4 weeks and a half.
So what would be? Would you have to wait until the last day of school because of the?
No, what I would recommend is you put together a big package, put it on the street well in advance before school ends, so that they can pre-purchase the equipment and have that ready to go when the last day of school ends. They're ready.
And installation can be done over the summer.
Right.
No problem. Well, I mean, no, but I mean,
there's always a
yeah,
problem,
right,
trust
sorry.
me.
You've got 8 weeks to get as much done as you
but I mean, generally, assuming normal,
With this type of system.
nothing unusual that it could be installed in an 8
No,
week
like I
period.
said, in terms of the piping and the insulation and the equipment that goes with this system, it's really geared for tight areas. You don't have a lot of room above your ceiling to put big, expansive type equipment like heat pumps and things of that nature. Where these small fan coil units, because of the latest technologies, they're so small and concentrated, you're popping ceiling tiles and running pipe above the ceiling and obviously supporting that. That's probably the biggest piece. The actual installation of the fan coils themselves connected to the refrigerant pipe is actually the easiest part because they're really made for drop ceilings, which you have everywhere.
Okay.
Would you guys have like an approximate timeline? Like the earliest this could possibly be done would be.
I mean, if you're talking, no, we have to have a fund, and that is a larger discussion. It's part of, our capital improvement plan. It's part of looking at options for bonding. I mean, we don't have this money, right? So the question is, and we frankly have only 2 ways of getting money. Either it comes from the town council through the taxpayers, or it comes through a bond through the town council to the taxpayers. So we're in, conversations with the appropriate people about, our long-term planning. This is part of our long-term plan. So it's really difficult to say. I mean, just know that it is something that we're looking at, and we're trying to find ways to get it done.
So it would be spring of 2019 if I kind of do some rough math, the earliest.
I mean, I can't even tell you, and we have, work like this has to be done in the summers, and it needs right approval, and everything's on a tight timetable, so it gets really tricky.
And it does need RIDE approval. Anything over $500,000 would have to go through all the RIDE schematic design documents, construction documents. We have dealt with that before, but that's about a 4-month time frame too. So when we
It really
start,
depends on what you're putting in the package.
Right.
for them to look at too, so.
Right. And we wouldn't, clearly we wouldn't start doing that unless we knew that we had funding, unfortunately, because it's a long time.
Dr. Z.
So, Dave, tonight was designed to get this information. The meeting that Mr. Blasball talked about, we're trying to get a date for, and the reason we're trying to do that in the first week of December is that in the second week of December, we have our annual meeting with the town council. So we want to be prepared for the town council meeting to come to them with some real, proposals about how we would like to do this, whether it's through requests to them for the money or some kind of a bonding initiative. And, there's timetables with those kinds of things too. So, I would just say, we're in the thick of it right now, and I would suggest that in the next few weeks or so, we should know a lot more about the direction we're looking to go.
I'm just worried that, this is obviously going on for a really long time.
We understand.
Where this goes and where it stops. This is the furthest we've ever made it, I realize that.
And it's
We
still
appreciate
moving,
that.
so.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Yep.
Jim, so of the alternate items, beyond air conditioning, do you know, or is there a way to find out how much of an impact those other items would have without air conditioning? If we did decide to do fans, roof coating, window shades, would it be
enough?
would it be a noticeable improvement or negligible?
It will help, but I don't think it's going to get you where it's going to be, 68 to 72 temperature range by a long shot. Without having some air introduced into these spaces, mechanically speaking, ultimately, I don't think you're going to get there. But I mean, to be able to knock the sun glare down is a good step. Like we put attic ventilation in there, it was a good step, but it can't work by itself. It needs some additional items, whether that be an air conditioning or some kind of mechanical system.
Thank you. Anything else? So, we have reached our routine items. So first, if I could have a motion to seal the executive session minutes of November 14th, 2017.
So,
Second.
I have a motion and a second. So this is the vote of Mr. Jones. And discussion. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passed unanimously. And I can disclose that no votes were taken during today's executive session. We've reached our consent agenda. Do any members have any items that they would like to exempt from our consent agenda? Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Don't hear any, so I would ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda in its entirety.
motion to approve?
Second.
Motion's McGovern, second Mr. Jones. Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Next, we have a school committee approval of recommended charter review topics for the town council. Mr. Jones was kind enough to send me a bit of a talking points and things. Let me bring it up, because he incorporated some items that I wanted in there as well. So, do you want to talk?
Sure. So first of all, I would like to thank the town council for, they put this on their agenda and allowing us to provide some input before they go final on this. And I always commend them to have the charter commission look at it, because I think it's a dynamic situation and every 6 years maybe isn't enough. Having said that, I think a couple items at least to discuss, and then obviously other members have more topics, but and this may be a legal question about, because this section is actually in the ordinance, and I know the charter is part one of the ordinance. It's there's ordinance, special acts, or charter, special acts, and ordinance, but whether this is something the charter commission can take or straight to town council, either way, But Section 2.1 speaks to the bidding amounts of 5 and 10,000. That was set by Rhode Island General Law 45 and 55-9. And there's a clause in that law that says it's supposed to be periodically increased based on some CPI formula. And that's been 20-something years, and I think clearly our town has the latitude, if they so choose, to increase the amounts. Of course, that doesn't take away the discretion of the town council or school committee to ask their respective town manager and superintendent for any particular one that may be below that to require bidding. But I believe since these were set 20-something years ago, and if you look at the size of our budgets and projects, we could probably increase them and still feel confident we're meeting the intent of the law. And so I would say it would be nice if the Charter Commission could look, if this is under their purview, but even not, to recommend the town council that those amounts be updated, at least in North Kingstown, and keeping the same provisions that the rest of the bidding law has. I don't know, Mary, if you want to speak to each one.
I think some districts have actually increased that, the 5,000. Many have.
Right.
Yeah, because they probably followed the guidelines of
Yeah.
the state law decision to, adjust it.
And so we can leave it up to the Charter Commission if they feel it's just an ordinance or it's something they can recommend. The second on vacancies, I'll let
I start this conversation the same way every time I mention it, which is this is not in any way saying anything about Mrs. McGovern, who was appointed by virtue of this charter provision. But essentially, the way our town charter works is that if there is a vacancy on the school committee, right now it goes to the candidate who received the highest number of votes among the unsuccessful candidates in the last election. And then if that person is not available, it goes to the town council to fill the vacancy. What became apparent when we had a vacancy very, very early in a member's term was, my problem with this, again, is not with you or anything else, it's just a matter of what I see as, just the fundamental aspects of a representative democracy, which was that we ended up having someone who was appointed by the town council, never ran for election like the other members in the community. And I have to say one more time, this is not about you. It's about the process. But, you didn't have to run, no one ever had to vote for you, and yet the term ended up being a 3-year and 11-month term. And I just think that that's a problem. And what my suggestions have always been would be that we work something in that essentially says, I am not in favor of having special elections in the middle of the year because there's an added cost. So there's a way I think we could deal with that, which would be to say that in the event that there were a vacancy, I have no problem with it going to the highest number of votes unsuccessful candidate. If they are unable to serve or don't serve, then I think it should go to the council, but I think that the council should only be able to fill that appointment until the next general election. And what I would propose is that at that next general election, essentially there would be an extra seat that would be on the ballot. So just hypothetically speaking, if it were to happen right now, the next general election would have 2 of us up for election. There would actually then be 3 vacant seats. And then what we would need to do, and I believe there's some other towns that do it effectively this way, whichever candidate that was successful that got the lowest number of votes would have the short term, because remember, we serve 4-year terms. So we would have 3 seats up instead of the usual 2. The highest vote getters would get 4-year terms. The lowest vote getter would get a 2-year term and serve out the remainder of that vacancy. And that way, you have a hybrid. The town gets to appoint somebody, but it could never be more than 2 years. And then after that, someone has to run for election. I think that's a good compromise that doesn't provide any additional cost to the town. But you don't have to need a special election. So that's my recommendation. If you folks like.
In addition to the situation that occurred with my appointment, it's also possible that you could have a situation where there's a vacancy for a really long time.
Yep.
Because of just experienced in another town. So
Yes, I was going to say, and we have one of our sister towns down south, South Kingstown right now, is dealing with a tremendous amount of trouble with their charter provisions because every one of their vacancies goes to the council, and that has created a tremendous amount of strife within the town. I don't know the people personally, but just reading the newspapers, I know they've had a lot of problems down there. So I think our way is better than what they do, but I think we can be more better to be completely grammatically incorrect.
Well, and I think the point is, what we're asking is the commission look at section 903, and obviously people will have different views and competing things can do that, but we would ask the commission to see if these or other parts of section 903 should be reviewed and then recommendations made. The last one was on section 908, which deals with the school committee budget, which of course is tied into sections 1004 through 1011 and Schedule A. And what I would ask there is, the language in that was developed years ago based on a different, I think, state budget methodology. There's also language like the town clerk is supposed to publish the budget in a local newspaper. I don't think that's been done. And supposed to make appropriate copies.
She does do that.
Publish it.
She does.
The whole budget?
Just, the summer.
Well, right, and
Yeah.
so, and it's
Yeah.
supposed to make appropriate copies, which maybe now is more appropriately made online, and any copies made for someone who's requested to do any special accommodations. But I think the whole process should just be relooked at and eliminate some of the archaic language. For example, it gives the town council almost no discretion except for if there's the date of the 30th, 6th day, whatever falls on a Saturday. I think the town council should have a little more discretion to say, we may be waiting on a number from the state or our ride census or state aid, and to make better decisions. So I would ask the commission just look at how the state budget process works, how our town budget deadlines are, look at some other neighboring towns which seem to have later dates for some reason, and maybe establish a new or revised schedule, and or at least put concrete dates instead of dates that make everyone pull out their calendar and count backwards 50 days. So nothing earth-shattering, maybe just reviewing it and bringing it up to align with more current realities of how municipal and school budgets are made.
Any other members have any suggestions or recommendations that they'd like to forward on to the charter review committee?
Along the lines of that language, they could easily say the first Monday in April or something like that, rather than a date.
Right, well, they have the first Wednesday in May, but then everything else says 36 days prior, 50 days prior. You're right.
There's one date and then it tracks back.
Right, it might be, like you said, just say, okay, if you want to keep first Wednesday in May, then it's the third Wednesday in April, right, instead of, but I agree.
So, Mrs. Healy, I'll work with Mrs. Healy, Dr. Ajay and I will work with Mrs. Healy to get that kind of typed up for the chair, to sign that as a letter to go to the town council president. So good luck with that, Mrs. Healy.
I can help you with mine, Bob can help you with his.
Yeah, no, well, I'll help you. I'm pretty sure.
Well, and I think part of it is, we don't have to include, I mean.
It doesn't, right, we don't have to have that much detail.
We don't.
We want you to look at these sections.
We want you to look at section 903. We want you to look
And
at
I'm perfectly happy, and
reasons,
I would
right.
like, I'll try to get to when they have their meeting, and I can,
Yeah.
get citizens' comments and make my case. And I don't think we need a vote on that, really, so. Do you think, well, let's do a vote. Why not? So I'll make a motion to approve that the school committee recommend that the Charter Review Commission look at section 2.1 with the competitive bidding ordinance, section 903 of the charter with respect to vacancies, and sections 908, 1004. I can get you this.
Oh, heck.
Thanks.
through 1,000.
908 through, oh wait, isn't it?
1,004 through 1,000.
1004 through 1011 with respect to the budget schedule. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second. Any further discussion? All those those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. And I'm going to send you what I'm looking at right now, so that will help.
Okay.
So next is we have on our agenda to appoint a liaison to the town audit committee. I think Mr. Jones, you would volunteer to serve in said
I would,
capacity.
although I'm open, you need to propose something and then slough it off on someone else, so, unless anybody else wants it, I will volunteer to do it. And this was generated, I think for two reasons. One is that the town council has a liaison to the audit committee, and so we should have we have a school committee person rep on the audit committee. I think having a liaison is helpful. And I would say also, last year we didn't get the auditors to come speak to us for a couple of reasons, but nonetheless, the ability to maybe go, the audit committee's not the auditors, but they have a lot of influence and are charged by the town council with recommending the auditors in the audit process. So I think having a representative who will attend their meetings in a little more formal manner would be useful.
So I will make a motion to appoint Mr. Jones to be our liaison to the town audit committee, unless someone else is opposed.
Don't
a second.
calm down here.
Everybody volunteer at once.
Settle down.
I'll second your motion.
You can. I need a second.
Second.
I'll give it to Mrs. Stevens, because she hadn't done one yet. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Next, we have school committee approval of superintendent's goals. If I could have a motion to approve that item.
So moved.
A motion.
Second.
Second. Any discussion on it? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Unfinished business, we have the 2017-2018 school budget. Anything to report on that?
Nope.
And then no other new business. We have reports. The summer sports camp summary is in your packets. People would ask to hear from Mr. Thomas on the status of that. We have disposal notifications and our financial reports. Any questions or comments on those?
Since the mini pads is also an attempt to recoup some funds, can we
Yes,
get a
absolutely.
follow-up
On how successful we were.
Oh, absolutely. I will.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't give you any estimate on that, how that goes, but absolutely, that is the goal.
And then we have reached the end of our agenda. I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Motion and a second. The motion is Stevens. Mr. McGovern, second. All those in favor? Aye. Passes. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.